Thank you. Ghana's first president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, said, and that quote has been shown here, "I'm not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me." Though I have no proof, I suspect that this sentiment was heavily influenced by his time in America, where he completed his undergraduate studies at Lincoln University and his graduate studies at the University of Pennsylvania. He was also a frequent visitor to Harlem, and this was in the late 1930s and 1940s, at a time when most Ghanaian intellectuals were completing their higher education in European universities. During his 8 years in the United States, Nkrumah was able to experience at first hand racism and the Jim Crow laws. Nkrumah was already a believer in Pan-Africanism before he went to the United States. He was a huge fan of Marcus Garvey, whose Black Star Line was an attempt to facilitate movements between North America and Africa, particularly Liberia, where free blacks had been emigrating since the 1820s. The Black Star, which is featured prominently on Ghana's flag, has come to be a defining part of our national identity. It underscored his rallying cry, which was the unity of all African peoples. He wanted the story of the diaspora and the stories of all the other indigenous people who had been colonized on the African continent to be a part of our national story. So much so that at the hour of Ghana's independence, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah famously proclaimed that the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of the African continent. It was a heady and ambitious statement, and the years that followed were equally as heady and ambitious, full of growth, infrastructural development, and the building of alliances between other newly independent African nations. There was a sense of hope. No, it was more than that. It was an intoxicating feeling of endless possibilities. It was a pure, perhaps naive belief that we could attain our own modern day version of the glory that our forebears like Shaka the Zulu and Mansa Musa had, and that we could build our nation states to be as exemplary as the Mwene Mutepa Empire, Songhai, Mali, and the Ghana empires that had existed before. And then came the coup d'etats, many inspired by the imperial nations, not just in Ghana, but in most of the other nations that had newly gained independence. And then came even more coup d'etats, one after the other, following by the imprisonment and exile of our liberation leaders. We now know as Ghanaians, as author Ama Ataidu wrote, that there are powerful forces undermining our progress in Africa. We suffered decades of brain drain that emptied a sizable portion of the continent's population, adding scores of exiles to the diaspora. And our nations themselves were surviving but barely on the remittances that those individuals sent home. It will surprise